What would you do if the one thing you loved most in the world, the only thing that made you feel alive, was slowly, permanently taken from you? Not your job, not your money, not even your health. Your gift. The thing you were born to do. Some people collapse. Some people disappear. Some people spend the rest of their lives grieving what they lost. But every once in a while, someone makes a different choice. Someone decides that silence is not the end. It is just a different kind of music. Stay with me until the end, because this story might change the way you hear your own life. By the time he was 26 years old, Ludwig van Beethoven was already one of the most celebrated musicians in Europe. He had come from a small German city with nothing but raw talent and a burning, unshakable belief that he was meant to create something the world had never heard before. Vienna adored him. Aristocrats competed to have him perform in their homes. Critics called him a genius. Audiences wept at his concerts. But inside the very thing that made him extraordinary, inside his ears, something was quietly failing. It began as a ringing, soft at first, like a bell heard from across a river. Then louder. Then constant. Ludwig told no one, not his closest friends, not his patrons, not his brother. He was a musician. His ears were his entire world. If the world discovered that the great Beethoven was going deaf, he was certain it would be over. So he performed through the ringing. He composed through the headaches. He nodded at conversations he could no longer fully hear, smiling at the right moments, hoping no one noticed. His friend Carl noticed. "You seem distracted lately," Carl told him one evening, watching Ludwig strain to hear the musicians tuning their instruments across the rehearsal hall. "Are you sleeping?" "I'm fine," Ludwig said, "just tired." But Carl wasn't convinced. He had known Ludwig since they were young. He could see the fear behind those restless eyes, the fear of a man watching his world shrink, one day at a time. Ludwig was not just afraid of losing his hearing. He was afraid of losing himself. By the time he was 30 years old, the hearing in both ears had deteriorated so badly that he could no longer perform in public without humiliation. There was an incident at a concert, an orchestra rehearsal, where he conducted a piece and didn't realize the tempo had completely unraveled. The musicians kept playing, confused, glancing at each other. The audience shifted in their seats. A violinist finally walked to Ludwig's side and whispered, "They have finished, maestro." Ludwig had not heard a single note of the final passage. He walked home alone that night through the empty Vienna streets. He sat at his piano for a long time without playing. Then he opened his desk drawer and wrote a letter, not to a friend, not to a patron, but to his brothers, a letter he planned to give to them only after his death. He wrote, "I was soon compelled to withdraw myself to live life alone. If it sometimes tried to get the better of me, it was hindered by my music, and thank God for that." He described the shame of standing beside a stream while a shepherd played a flute, and he heard nothing. The shame of asking people to speak louder and seeing their confusion. He was 29 years old, and he was preparing to give up. He folded the letter. He sealed it. He placed it in a drawer. And then he sat in the silence for a very long time. It was Count Waldstein who found him. Waldstein had been one of Ludwig's earliest patrons, the man who had first told a young, rough-edged musician from Bonn that he had the soul of Mozart and the discipline of iron. He had believed in Ludwig before Ludwig believed in himself. He had heard through mutual friends that the young composer had gone quiet, no new compositions, no public appearances, just silence. So Waldstein came to him. He sat across from Ludwig in that small apartment and listened, truly listened, as Ludwig finally admitted the truth he had been hiding for 4 years. The ringing, the deterioration, the shame, the concert. The letter in the drawer. When Ludwig finished, Waldstein was quiet for a moment. Then he reached into his coat pocket and placed a small, smooth animal bone on the table between them. Ludwig stared at it. "What is that?" "A trick I learned from a man who went blind in his 50s, Waldstein said calmly. He placed one end of a wooden rod against the page he was reading and the other end against his teeth. He could feel the textures through the vibrations in his jaw. He told me, what the eyes could no longer give him, the body still could. Waldstein leaned forward. "Ludwig, where does music live?" Ludwig didn't answer. "Not in your ears," Waldstein said quietly. "Music lives in your mind, in every pattern you have absorbed for 30 years. You can hear a symphony that doesn't exist yet. You can hear it completely before a single musician touches their instrument. You have always been able to do that. Your ears only ever transmitted what your mind already knew." He tapped the bone on the table. "Your ears are failing. Your mind is not. Stop mourning the messenger. The music is still there." Ludwig looked at the bone for a long time. That night, he went home, sat at his piano, and bit down on a thin rod of wood he had carved himself, pressing the other end against the body of the piano. He played a single chord. He felt it travel through the bone, up through his jaw, into his skull. He sat very still. Then he played another. And for the first time in years, he smiled. The road back was not straight. There were mornings Ludwig woke up and reached for his ears first, hoping the ringing had somehow stopped, and found it worse than the day before. There were weeks when he sat at the piano and felt nothing, and the silence in his apartment felt like a tomb. There were people who tried to help and only made it harder, friends who spoke too loudly, who looked at him with pity, who treated him like a man already gone. Ludwig fired 2 of them from his life. Not out of cruelty, out of survival. He was doing something that required all of him. He was learning to compose from within, not from without. He was building music from memory, from imagination, from 30 years of absorbed patterns, the way a master architect can design a building they will never see standing. He sawed the legs off his piano so it sat lower to the floor, and he could press his whole forearm against it and feel the vibrations through his skin. He trained himself to read the faces of the musicians during rehearsals, the bow tension, the breath intake before a phrase, and translate what he saw into what he could no longer hear. He filled notebooks with musical ideas scrawled at 3 a.m. Pages and pages of corrections, more than he had ever written before, because he could no longer quickly confirm with his ears whether something worked. He had to think it through completely before committing to paper. His compositions from this period surprised even him. They were more complex, more daring, more deeply human. He told Waldstein, "I think going deaf has made me listen more carefully than I ever did when I could hear." Waldstein smiled. "Now you are composing from the inside." 7 years after that night, with the wooden rod and the bone, 7 years of partial hearing, of growing silence, of learning to trust the music in his mind over the noise from the world, Ludwig van Beethoven sat down and began writing his 9th symphony. He was 50 years old, almost completely deaf. The symphony he had been hearing, in full inside his head, for the better part of a decade. On the 7th of May, 1824, the 9th Symphony received its premiere in Vienna. At the end of the final movement, the famous Ode to Joy, the audience rose to their feet. They applauded. They waved handkerchiefs. They wept. Ludwig stood with his back to the crowd, still marking time with his baton, still deep inside the music only he could hear. A young soprano in the orchestra, a woman named Caroline Unger, walked gently to his side and turned him around by the arm. And Ludwig van Beethoven, a man who had been completely deaf for several years, looked out at a hall of people giving him a standing ovation for music he had never physically heard, and he saw it. He saw the tears. He saw the mouths open in shouts of joy. He saw the handkerchiefs raised toward him like small white flags of surrender to something greater than any of them. He bowed. "My friend, I don't know what has been taken from you. Maybe it's your health. Maybe it's a relationship. Maybe it's a career you built for years, or a dream that felt so close you could touch it. Maybe you've been telling yourself that without that one thing, without that specific door, everything you were meant to create is gone. But here is what Beethoven's life teaches us. The gift is not in the instrument. The gift is in you. Your circumstances will change. Your tools will fail. Your body will have limits. But the thing that makes you you, the vision, the dedication, the capacity to feel deeply and create from that feeling, that cannot be taken, only abandoned. 3 things Beethoven chose to do that you can choose too. 1. He stopped mourning the tool and started trusting the source. When he could no longer hear music, he stopped trying to force it through broken channels and listened inward instead. 2. He kept working, even when he wasn't sure. The years between going deaf and completing the 9th were full of unfinished sketches, false starts, and doubt. He worked through all of it. 3. He let someone in. Waldstein didn't save him, but he gave Ludwig one idea at the right moment, and that was enough. You don't need perfect conditions. You need one honest thought, one loyal person, and the courage to keep going in the dark. The world's greatest symphony was written in silence. What will you create in yours? If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today, and subscribe to this channel for more stories like this. Until next time, stay quiet enough to hear what's already inside you.